So,
Okay.
hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar. I'm Marshane, I'm part of the team here at Oxford College of Marketing. I'd just like to let you know that this is being recorded, just so that we can send it out to you all afterwards. Today we've got a really exciting webinar hosted by Natalie Trice on getting press office ready and mastering media engagement. Natalie is a PR consultant, career coach and trainer and has worked in media for 25 years, so she's very qualified for today's talk. We'll have the presentation with Natalie first, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So Natalie, I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone joining today. I am joining from Devon. Actually, I think that we're further towards 30 years than 25, but that's absolutely fine. So I am here obviously to talk to you today about running press offices and media engagement in 2024, which I think some of you will agree that it's pretty hard, but it's also absolutely possible. But if you've got the fundamentals in place, it makes it even easier. So why did the college ask me to come and speak to you today, not just some random person off the street? So as Marshine said, I'm Natalie Trice and I am a PR expert. So I've worked in the world of publicity for, I think it's probably getting on for 30 years, but I don't really like to say that. Today I'm a PR trainer and mentor. I'm a member of the CIPR. I'm also a tutor for the college in Oxford. I'm a university guest lecturer and mentor at Westminster. I've written 3 books. I'm an accredited coach. I'm an award-winning hip expert. So essentially my son was born with hip dysplasia and there was no support. So I used the power of publicity and writing my first book to essentially turn myself into an orthopedic specialist without doing any operations on anybody at all. I have a PhD pending. And I've also set up a magazine called Yomu. So if anyone wants to pitch that and actually put into practice what I'm going to teach or talk about today, you can do that as well. So when I'm not working or writing my novel, I live by the sea in Devon. I love a good coffee. I do have coffee here. I love magazines, absolutely live for print magazines rather than digital. I've got 2 teenage sons, I've got 2 dogs, and you'll either find me at hot yoga or swimming outside. So that's me. And I'm very happy to answer any questions as we go along. I know there's a chat box and there's Q&A, so do feel free to ask questions, and I'm more than happy to help to ensure you get the most value from this hour. Okay, so first of all, why press office and why are we talking about that? So just to give you a tiny little bit more background, my first PR role was when I left Tokyo. I was an English teacher and I arrived in London and I needed a job. So I started to work in a PR agency as a receptionist, only I wasn't very good at handling the phones. And I think probably on day 3, they'd had enough of me messing that up and they put me onto some accounts instead. And I automatically loved it. And we ran the press office for Betty Crocker and for QuickSave. So I don't know if there's anyone here old enough to remember what QuickSave is, but essentially it was a supermarket in a box. And from the beginning, I had a really amazing account director who was an absolute devil with a red pen, but she taught me everything I needed to know at the time and so much more. And that fundamental understanding and learning has kind of helped my entire career and probably helped me work with multiple companies like Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, CNN, Cartoon Network, Royal College of Art. You name it, I have probably PR'd it at some point, or I now work with businesses so they can do it for themselves. But you've got to have the fundamentals in place. And I think there's a tendency that we want to get going, we want to speak to journalists, but if you don't have those basics in place, it can be very hard to maintain and sustain any coverage or any activity. So that's what we're going to kind of look at today. So I have worked in multiple press offices, and before I was doing that, my stepfather had an agency and he was essentially running press offices for big music events and working with people like Phil Collins and Slash. So It's kind of in my bones. And I hope that the session will help you to see what you already have, but also make some changes so that you have the best press office function and media relationships that you can. So, saying that, it's then obvious that no two press offices or no two press officers are the same. So, everyone who's here today, feel free to put it in the chat if you want to, but you're all going to be working in different organizations. So, some of you might be in house, some of you might be agency, some of you might be business owners. There are no two press offices that are the same. It's not that prescriptive, and no job and actually no day is ever the same. So it's one of those situations where you've got to run with whatever you're faced as you come into the office in the morning or as you switch on your laptop. But what I'm going to teach you and talk about today is pertinent for all of it. And there'll be themes that will run through every single organization, every PR out there. So I just looked up this morning, actually, because I could talk about this all day, but just looking at the definitions of a press office, the one that I found that I felt was most applicable. So this is the part of an organisation that's responsible for giving information to journalists, but also building ongoing relationships that impact external perceptions. So the function of a press office itself is that you are the kind of communication hub for dealing with journalists, but also with influencers, with podcasters, with a broad range of writers. So it's changed since I first started, nearly 3 decades ago, where we had fax machines and we would bike images across London. So it's changed in terms of the tactics, but actually the fundamentals of what the press office does. Our job is to work with the media in order to get stories out about our clients or about our business or our organization. And we then have the press officers. Now, whoever's here today, you might be an account manager, you might be an account assistant, you might be a director. There's multiple levels and multiple names that we have. So it's not uniform, but essentially the kind of work that you're doing, and I'll talk about this a little bit more during the session, is that you're writing and editing press releases, you're organizing press conferences, writing copy for websites, creating content for social media, and even more than that. And every single job is going to be different. But what it all falls underneath is that these press offices, these functions, they can be in an agency. So you might be working in a PR agency that is consumer led, and you run the press office for beauty brands. It might be that you're working in a finance agency and you represent banks. You might be in-house. So you might be working for a government department. You might be working for a a chocolate company. You could be working for anyone, but your function is sat within the in-house. You might be freelance. So a lot of my clients will be freelance and they go into press office functions and they do the work there. You could be a founder, so you could be a new founder, or a business owner, you're doing it yourself, or you could be in a press office at an event. So I know that a couple of people here today have talked about running events, running the press office as an event. So it's almost like it's a mobile press office, but fundamentally what we're doing is exactly the same job. So it doesn't change. So we're going to first of all look at the ever-changing media landscape, and what is happening at the moment, because it changes so quickly. Every day, if you sign up for things like PR Moment or PR Week, that's a really good way to keep on top of the news and to find out what's happening. But it does change very, very quickly, and the trends are changing all of the time. So I think that even as part of your job, you are able to keep abreast of this. So looking at where the journalists you're working, have they moved? Have they gone on maternity leave? Are they back from maternity leave? So looking at things like diary directory as well is going to be really helpful for you. So I looked into what some of the changes are at the moment. And there is this continued trend and transition from traditional print to digital platforms. So last week there was an announcement from the Evening Standard that after however many, I can't remember how many years it was, I want to say 250, but I think that's a bit too long. They were actually going from being a daily print, which people would get on the tube, to now being a online platform. And the reasons for that were various. One was hybrid working. So people simply aren't going into London on the underground at the same extent that they were before COVID. Also, the underground has Wi-Fi. So people maybe aren't picking up a paper copy of the news. They can look at it on their phones, but also costs and a change in advertising habits. So there's lots of things. So it is going to continuously be changing, and we need to be aware of that. Also, we have to look at how people consume their news and how they consume the information around them. So looking again at the world in which you work and your business, and then how those people consume their news. So if you looked last week, I mean, I have teenage sons. I don't use TikTok, but my teenage sons use TikTok, and they flagged up that the Prime Minister was on TikTok talking about the election and what national service meant to them. So we do need to be aware of not only our clients' needs, but also our target audiences, and actually tapping into what they consume in terms of the media. That's really important. There's an increasing use of AI across all sectors, um, be that in journalism, be that in PR, be that in social media. It is going to have an impact, and that changes faster than we can keep up with, but it's something that we need to be aware of. There's also an emphasis on video content and live streaming. So again, it's looking at how people consume content and what people want. And we need to be able to, as PR professionals, to kind of understand those elements and work towards communicating in the best way with the publics that are of our interest. Interestingly, I also found that there was a massive shift looking at the consumption of podcasting and audiobooks over radio. So it's the research that I found said that in the UK, podcasting has experienced remarkable growth, an estimated 21.2 million listeners in 2022, 46 million spent on podcast advertising. And I think that just keeps going up. So it's looking at those trends, looking at how you can capture those 21.2 million listeners if they are the right people for you. It's also a case of using data. If we look at the election again, obviously that's very topical at the moment, but data is going to be massively important. It's always been there, but I think at the moment, if we can have a good statistic, if you can have really good surveys, if you can have consumer insights, that helps. That helps you with your stories. Looking at social media platforms, and again, that idea of influencing news dissemination is really, really key. And also, I think that we do have to look at local newspapers and publishers, and they can be an extremely powerful medium to work with, but they are also experiencing a lot of cutbacks. So things within maybe the BBC is changing, local papers, I think some radio stations. This isn't just in the UK. I was working with a client in New York yesterday, and they said exactly the same thing, that quite often radio stations, it could be because of the impact of podcasting and audiobooks, they're looking more and more for advertising over pure editorial opportunities. So that is going to be an impact. And certainly I know some people today, you will be using local press to communicate with the local communities. So just having that in mind, but it's still doable. We can still get this coverage and build the relationships with the journalists. Okay, so what does this actually mean for press office and press officers? Essentially, it just means that you're going to be as busy as you always were. Working in the press, working in publicity, I always say it's PR, it's not ER, but that doesn't mean it's not fast paced. It can be quite stressful. You've got multiple stakeholders yourself to keep happy, but it means now the news is happening often in real time. You need to be able to respond to things very quickly. You need to be, if you're in an agency, or I think if you're anywhere, you almost need to be one step ahead of your clients or your internal stakeholders, as well as the press, and looking at what the trends are and how you can be the first team to actually capitalize and be able to newsjack and look at those opportunities as they're coming in. So that is very key. and you always need to be able to respond quickly but efficiently. They're not always sit closely or so well together, but it is really important. We're also just looking at this idea of when we're looking at journalists and how we build up relationships with them, their own personal branding has become increasingly important. So authors, journalists, influencers. So not only looking at their social media, obviously not stalking them, not going into DMs all the time, that kind of thing, but being aware, having this awareness of the landscape, but also looking at things like Substack. So a lot of journalists are on Substack. I find actually there's a lot of journalists in America. They're using Substack to send out media requests. And it can be really interesting to do that if you're geeky like me for this kind of thing, because you start to pick up an idea of what people want and what they're looking for. And it's a really good way. You just hit reply. It's a really good way of building up relationships with them. So I would certainly look at doing that. And so with ever evolving technology trends and changes in consumer behavior, we have to be able to adapt the way that we work in a similar way. Um, and thinking about this is looking for new opportunities. So we've always been looking for new opportunities, but being creative and really tapping into what's going to make a journalist read your email over anyone else's. So I quite often tell the story of a friend who's a national magazine editor, and I asked her one day how many, and she had 17,000. So every time you send an email, every time you don't get a response, just think you are one of very many PRs or business owners that are pitching. So we need to really get it right when you're sending those emails out. How are you going to cut above the noise of everybody else? Okay, so first of all, we're going to look at the essentials of press office operations. And as I said at the start, if you have questions, please do ask me. I really don't mind. What I'm going to say before I say anything else is know the media. And this sounds really, really obvious, but it's amazing how many people, both clients, but also as someone who's written for magazines and now has a magazine, how pitches can be so wrong. So whatever industry you work in, whatever your clients are, whoever you represent, just make sure you really understand the media that you're pitching. So if it's a menopause, I don't know, moisturizer or product, make sure that you really understand Red Magazine, Platinum, Good Housekeeping, Stylist, maybe, Women's Health. Really get to know what those people want. What are they covering? What are the different elements of the magazine? Go through them, post-it note them, use Readly, whatever it is. If you want to be a really good PR and you want to be really effective at your job, you need to understand the media you're pitching to. Listen to the podcast, listen to the TV, the radio programs, watch the TV programs, and just kind of embrace that media, because that's going to give you an advantage over other people who maybe don't understand it or don't know where their client would sit. So that is one key takeaway from today. Okay, so you will all do a massive range of things. And if there's things I missed, please do pop it into the chat or ask me any questions. And it's really, really varied. But some of the main things, some of the main jobs that you'll have is managing media relations and inquiries, but also building those relationships internally. So looking at your clients, if you're agency side, looking at the stakeholders within the organization, if you're in-house, as well as any suppliers that you have. Maybe you work with photographers, videographers, social media teams, and trying to have as many people who can help you deliver your very best work and have them on side. You'll also be developing and obviously executing PR strategies at different stages of your career, and your level of experience. There'll be different elements of that. If you're in an agency, you'll also obviously be potentially pitching for new business. And again, if you've got good relationships with the media, then being able to talk about this during pitches can be a real advantage. There'll also be elements of organising press events and briefings. So they're not as, I don't think that they are as prevalent as they were before COVID, but they're certainly still happening and maybe coming back into their own a little bit. But again, we have to remember that journalists aren't always working in the office. So actually getting them to come out to events can be more tricky. Then you're developing those proactive media strategies that you can then feed into more long-term campaigns that are going on. There's a lot of time spent creating media materials, social posts, press packs, especially if you work on events. So that's a part of your job. Also monitoring your media coverage, responding and reporting to those things. So fundamentally within the press office, you need to have that reporting element set up. It's not particularly fun or, a sexy part of the job, but especially if you are in an agency and you've got KPIs and they want to know their return on investment, then I would have these. Yes, someone had a question. I'm not sure how best to. If you pop your question in the chat, then I can, then Nicola or I can answer it. That's not a problem at all. Oh, sorry. Okay, so other parts of it as well. Attending events and managing imagining press offices on site. So when I was in some of my first jobs, I worked in tech, worked with people like Hewlett Packard and Epson, and I would go to a lot of trade events. And I'm sure some of you here know, but you have a part of the exhibition centre or the event. You can have interviews with journalists, with your clients. You can have the press packs. You might have goodie bags. There's all kinds of things going on. So there may be really kind of intense periods of time, maybe a week when you're actually at an event, you're on the floor, and you're doing all of those things. And that could be really, really intense. But actually, it's a massive advantage because if that gets you face to face with journalists, that's setting a really good foundation for the future in your relationship with them. So do try and do those. They're tiring, but they're also very good fun. And yeah, they're definitely worth doing to build up your experience. So again, we're setting up media interviews, media training. So sometimes media training will be done in-house or within an agency, or you might use an outside source for that. But I would say that if you have clients or you have internal parties who are speaking to the press, they are media trained. And whatever the campaign is, make sure that they've seen the press release, have FAQs for them, have images ready, make sure that they are prepared. And whatever they're saying externally is what you are communicating in your PR efforts, on your website, on your social media. Everything needs to be aligned. So that is really, really key. And then managing press events. So outside of things like exhibitions, you might have, we used to do a lot of screening when I worked in TV. So we would have things like screenings with Brad Pitt documentaries or James Cameron. So big events in big cities. Again, it's logistically a lot of work, but also a lot of fun. So those are always worth looking at. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I hope that you're okay. Okay, top tips on how we can effectively monitor media coverage. Yes, so I have come onto this, but so you can, I mean, you can use expensive monitoring. And what I would do is it depends on the campaign. So obviously track who you are pitching to, where your outreach efforts are, so you can just keep on top of coverage that's coming through. I think one of the things that journalists really struggle with at the moment is that they can't tell every PR when the coverage is coming out, and they can't flag every piece of coverage. I think that some of them will do, depending how good a relationship they are. Very basically, you can set up a Google alert. So just using those. I think there's another one, and I can't remember. It's similar to, there's also Talkwater. You can have a free subscription to that. And then there's the more expensive monitoring services. So do look at that, but then also do be aware of issues. And it's a whole bigger conversation, but also just be aware of how you then share that coverage with your clients in terms of licenses and permissions. But I would say at the very least, have Google alerts and then go and do some searches. Just tap your client, especially if it's at a time where maybe you've been reacting to something in the news and sending out statements and comments. And just at the end of the day or at the end of the week, just do a bit of an online search and see whether, because the other thing that might happen is, say you had a piece that went into, I don't know, I did something with the Mail recently, and it was a quote about the royal family, and then it was syndicated out to lots of other places. So just having that kind of spanning of being able to see where you are can be really helpful. So I hope that helps, but if you need anything else, just shout. So they're kind of like the basic things that you do day to day. You're probably already doing them, but also I thought that it was worth me kind of mentioning some of the sort of softer skills. Um, and really, there is that idea of being able to communicate effectively, and being able to work with a whole range of people, some of which are easier than others. Some are very stressed. It's a demanding industry to work in. And so you need to be able to be pretty resilient. Lots of us, not a sweeping statement, but lots of us are creative. We're not necessarily massively thick-skinned, but it is an industry where you do need to be resilient and tenacious. So it's a balance. So you need to be able to kind of be a bit of a chameleon and work with a wide range of people, in different circumstances. So that's one thing. Once someone said to me, all PR people are extroverts. I'm a complete introvert, but I can use the extroverted part of my personality when I need to. So just kind of being quite self-aware and knowing how best you work is always going to be helpful. Digital know-how, and I know this sounds obvious, and it might be older people like me, but so my sons are very tech savvy. But just making sure that you are kind of digitally savvy with things that are going on. So not only the social media platforms and how to use them and manage them, but also looking at those kind of content management systems, digital analytic tools, digital trends, even basic things like, how do you set up things like ConvertKit for clients? How do you use the different monitoring tools? Do you have Coverage Book? So do you know how to use PR Max or Roxhill? So just having those kind of basic skills, which you can add to your CV, which are all going to be helpful, but knowing about them and being able to utilize them in your work. Being able to kind of conduct some element of research and analysis. So I know when I teach the CIB courses with the college, we look at research and analysis. But as I said in an earlier slide, people like stats at the moment, they like numbers. So having that ability, being creative. So one of the first clients I ever worked on was a boiler company, and we had to be creative with how we got coverage for that company. So you do need to think outside of what's expected. And I think if you can kind of take this idea of what's the basic thing that the client wants or that your boss wants. So it might be some trade press, but where can you go further? Where can you take this out bigger? So you're not over servicing, but actually just seeing what is possible. Ethics and integrity, it's just kind of a given, but ethical considerations, ensuring transparency and honesty, and just generally being a good, kind, helpful person, which sounds naive, but actually that goes a massive way in how people work with you and are receptive to your ideas. It's really important, I think, and also the ability to keep calm. It's not always easy to keep calm. You might be on a deadline. There might be a crisis at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. There's all kinds of things that can happen. But if you can keep calm, and if that means just moving away from your desk, going for a walk, that's going to help you as well. Okay, so we're going to look at, we talked about part of the job being how we need to create a lot of material and usually a lot of content. So how do we actually do that in our everyday job? One of the most important things that you have to do is to understand your audience. And I talk about this a lot in my work because you need to understand every piece of communication, every social post, every press release, every feature, every comment. You need to be directing it at your ideal client, at the audience of your client. That means that you identify the demographics and then you look at what media do they consume. So if it's teenagers, it's going to be a different set of media, a different set of outlet and journalists than over 60s. Men, women, you really need to break it down and look at who you're talking to and then tailoring the messages to audiences' interests and needs. So that's the first step. And that makes it easier because if you can think about you're writing to one person, in effect, you're writing to two people because you're sending your pitch and your press release to a journalist, but who's their audience? Who are they thinking of? So if you have that one person, that one end user in mind, that helps you to create narrative that resonates, that they understand, that's not full of jargon. And we're using clear and concise language. So you almost need to deconstruct, especially if it's something that's industry heavy or complicated, you need to undo it because the journalist might write it in a totally different way, but we're giving that information in a way that people can understand when it's first pitched. And then you also just need to think about multimedia elements as well as the written word. So thinking, have you got images? Obviously, at the moment, video is massively popular and consumed a lot, so that's going to be helpful. Infographics, anything like that. How can you bring a story to life? And I think that one of the important things to do when you either start a new role or maybe you take on a new client is that you actually make sure that there are images, because having an image can make or break getting the coverage, but also the relationship with the journalist. Because if you get down the road with a case study and then suddenly say we don't have any images, that's going to annoy the journalist and probably impact your relationship and jeopardize the coverage. So it's just having that in mind. And then also this litmus test, which sounds a bit harsh, but we talked about having, thick skin. So does anyone care? So quite often your client will come to you and they want a press release, but actually it's not really a story, it's not really news, it's not worthy of a press release. So you need to be able to navigate those situations, but also write something and then actually think, will that journalist care if it hits their inbox? Are they bothered? Are they going to cover it? Is it actually news? Does it fit in the publication? Because you'll have already done your research at the beginning, and do they care? So do try and use that as a kind of guide when you're working on these things. So we don't always need a press release, as I just said. A press release, and this session does cover a lot, but I'll cover as much as I can so that it's helpful. When you have a press release, it needs to be about news, and it needs to be one page. So you need to have a really clear, engaging headline. That headline is also going to be the top line header in your email to break through the 17,000 emails in that journalist's inbox. So a winning headline is not going to be new website launched or book out. We need to be creative in the headlines that we come up with so that the journalist actually wants to click and open what you're sending them. And again, you need clear, engaging content under the headline. It needs to be concise and informative. And that lead paragraph, you've got one or two sentences that's got to tell the whole story. You're looking at who, what, when, where, why, and how. And you then add kind of more meat to the bones further into the press release. You have quotes from key stakeholders. So it might be that there is if it was a nutritionist, for example, they might add a quote about why we need to eat more protein. And then one of their clients might put a quote in the press release about how they followed the program and the impact it made by eating more protein. So it's going to be different for everybody, but having those quotes in there is really important. But then before you send anything out anywhere at all, especially if you're working with a third party or you've got partners and it's a collaboration, just make sure that everybody is happy and that it's been signed off. So they're kind of like the key parts. It's only one page, so your press release is only one page of A4. You have additional notes to editors underneath. Send your press releases in the body of an email, not as an attachment. So I've kind of talked to journalists that I know, I've talked to friends who are journalists, I've put it in my book, but they don't want PDFs. They don't want heavy images clogging up their inbox or trying to download them at home. Send them a clear pitch, put the press release in the body of the email, and then follow up. But don't send lots of attachments, don't use PDFs. So when we're responding to the media, that is also another thing. So we looked at press releases. Such a fundamental part of the press office is the work that you do with the journalists. So yes, you have the back end of PR. You've got the reporting, you've got the images, you've got the actual writing. But what happens when you are working with journalists every day? There's ongoing communication. You've got two ways of communicating with them. One is reactive and one is proactive. So I'll just go through the reactive elements at the moment. So I don't know whether there's anyone here at the moment, and I'm just checking time so that I don't know if there's anyone at the moment where you use things like journal request, response source, press plugs, dot media, but these are very much reactive opportunities. So journalists are looking for stories, things that I saw this morning, reactions to the election last night, Father's Day gifts, and summer events. So they're three things that journalists at the moment are looking for in the national press, in magazines, I saw radio. So you are going to respond to that and be reactive to their request. They're expecting emails, they're expecting content, they're probably expecting some rubbish. So you want to make sure if you are replying to that request, it's relevant, it's followed the deadline, and it actually matches what they want. So if they are asking for dog food companies and you make birdseed, don't reply, because that is not how to build those relationships with journalists. You send them what they want and what they're asking for when you're being reactive. You're then being proactive, which might be that you are sending out a press release because that your company has got a new survey, new results out, or you are working on an environmental campaign, or you're fundraising, or whatever it is that your press release is about. The journalist hasn't asked specifically for that information. They don't know that it's out there, they don't know you, they don't know that it's coming. But that's a proactive pitch where you're essentially saying, I'm here, this is my story, do you want to cover it? For some people, that can feel more intimidating, it can feel harder, but it's part of the job. And we have to do it every day and a lot of the day. So there's no getting away from doing that. Okay, general platforms that are free. Rachel, they're not. Yes, actually. So what you can do is Peter, who's the founder of Help a Reporter Out, he has one now that's called SOS. So I think Cision bought Help a Reporter. That's free. It's quite American led though. If you're in the UK, essentially I would say just go through Twitter. Don't engage on Twitter if you don't like it as a platform, but put in the journal request hashtag. Otherwise, Response Source is kind of the industry leader. And it's very good, but it's also expensive. I quite like Dot Media. They do a 2-week or a 1-week free trial. Editorial is also another one that's quite cost effective. And press plugs. So they're all good. They're all very good. And really it's just looking at if you have the time and you just want it for free, you'll get a lot on journal request, but it does take time. That's okay. Okay, so best practices, whether you are being proactive or reactive, responding promptly and accurately. So I've had situations where I've had people who have worked in the office, sent out a really big story, and then just disappeared for the day or gone on holiday. So if you're responding, being reactive or proactive, journalist comes back to you. One, that's great because it's a win and it doesn't always happen. But go back to them quickly. Don't dilly-dally around. Go back to them. We're all about being transparent and honest. When you're sending your stories out, whether it's reactive or proactive, have your images ready. This, I've said it once already, but I cannot stress it enough. Images make or break PR. So if you've got clients without images, or you've got people and they've taken a picture against their fridge and their kids have taken a selfie, it's not going to cut it with a Telegraph. So being really strict, having your images ready, as well as any extra comments, as well as spokespeople. So if it's something really high level and you've got your CEO, having them ready to speak. Having signed off comments can be really helpful if it's a busy environment and you don't have time to keep going back and forth. And then also being polite and professional. quite often I will get emails and someone uses my wrong name, they shorten my name, they put an H in it, they call me hun, they call me sweetheart, all of those things. These journalists are not your friends. This is a professional environment, so we need to keep it that way. So we're polite. There's this whole thing. Do we ask them if they're okay or having it depends on your style, but essentially it's a working relationship. You don't need to put kisses, all of that kind of thing, which I think is really kind of crosses the lines, and it happens a lot, but especially when it's a journalist for the first time, polite and professional is what we're looking for. We do need to anticipate um, common common questions and challenging questions. So if you're used to a journalist coming back and saying, well, X, Y, Z, or have you got this, or does it include that, or what about this thing that happened in the past, if it's a crisis comm situation, the more prepared you can be, and being kind of one step ahead of the journalists is great, because you know what they're going to ask and you want to give them that thing before they're going to ask for it. So you may well prepare further talking points, have your key messages, and maybe have an FAQ. So you could have an FAQ on your website. You could put it in notes to editors. There's lots of ways that you can do it, but really thinking out what are the questions that people ask often, and answer them before they're asked, because it'll make your life easier as well. And then always say thank you. You will be amazed at how many people do not go back to a journalist and say, thanks for that piece of coverage. Very few. And that also will give you a better relationship with the journalist, because what we want to do is, at this point, especially if you're early on in your career, you're building relationships, you're constantly hustling, you're constantly going out to journalists. We want to actually get to the point where journalists come to you. And that takes time, not necessarily you to answer the questions unless you're a business owner, but they come to you because they know that you respond promptly and accurately. They know that you're honest. They know that you have images. They know that your media people are well trained. They know that you're polite. They know that you're professional, and you help them. And I think if you can take anything from the session today, it's this slide, because making yourself helpful to journalists is going to be really, really helpful for your career. That is the one thing that I would really take away today. So further on, building strong relationships. You're not necessarily going to go cycling with journalists, although I do have friends now that are journalists, but life is always easier when you have good relationships with them. And if you're someone like me and you've been doing it for decades, they evolve with you. So we're looking at how we have those strong media relationships. And you could be sitting in London and yet you're working with the New York Times, or you're working with a podcaster in Australia. I have clients all over the world. There's no barrier anymore, but there's just fundamentals of how we get these strong relationships and we put them in place. So as I've already said, building trust and rapport with journalists is key to your PR success. Even if you climb the ranks, even if you're the CEO of somewhere, it's fundamental to public relations. And we need to know who those journalists are, what they're writing about, what they're interested in, how we're going to get them involved in our organisation and take notice of us. There are many benefits, long-term benefits of strong media relationships. And that comes from whether you're getting your clients into the press, actually getting feedback on pitches. So in the past, when I've been consulting, or have my clients within my agency, something's not hitting it, I have certain journalists and I can just ask them, why isn't it working? Why isn't might be something that I hadn't thought about. So they can be there for those kinds of things as well. But also you want to be their go-to. Again, you want to be their go-to. So they think, right, okay, well, I know that Nicola provides really great images. She can turn content round. You know, I've got contacts at Metro, for example, and they know that if they message me at 8 o'clock, I'll write a comment for them while I've dropped my kids off at school, and it'll be online by 11. But I've done it for a long time. I don't have to get it signed off by anybody, but that's what you want to be doing. And I would say sometimes I say 5, but your challenge is to have at least 10 go-to contacts in the press, so that you know that you have got maybe, I don't know, 5 nationals, a couple of glossy magazines, 2 podcasters and an influencer at the minimum. That makes your life easier. So you know that when your client has a new comment, when there's a breaking story, when there's a new campaign, that your first 10 are already done. And that takes time, but if you can kind of have that on your to-do list or your vision board or whatever it is, that's going to make your life easier. And then tips for maintaining ongoing communication with them, because we don't always. So you will be regularly updating them with relevant news. Relevant, sorry, being the word that we're using here. Then saying thank you. That's another thing. Personalizing your pitches and your press releases. Some of you will use some kind of database, but please check that you are using the correct format in those. So if you're using ConvertKit or using PR Max or Roxhill, please don't send out emails that say "Dear Editor." Don't forward. So quite often I'll get emails and it's clearly been forwarded from somebody else. We know we're one of a number, but you don't want to think that you're just another person that's been forwarded. So don't do that. Don't keep the forward in there. Don't write your pitch in GPT and then put it in the body of an email together with the formatting lines. I have that. Just these really small things that will make or break a relationship, especially if it's the first time you've emailed that journalist. Be proactive, be transparent, be responsive. Don't bombard them. So don't send out your press release or your pitch and then phone them and DM them to tell them that you've sent an email. They know. Unless it's gone into their junk, they know. They don't need you to phone them and say, have you got my press release? They don't need, and I know that sometimes in agencies, people will say, you've got to do that. It's not best practice. You can follow up. You can send out pitches any day of the week, but I find that Tuesday to send the first pitch or press release works with a follow-up on a Thursday. So if we're thinking about 4-day weeks, we're thinking about how people work now, when we can catch them, but find your own rhythm, but don't bombard them. And then also just keeping abreast of things like, as I've already said, Diary Directory. They're on Instagram. They've got all the news of kind of where the media are going, where people are getting new jobs. PR week as well as PR moments. So keeping an eye on the media landscape and where your contacts are going. You know, if you're desperate to, maybe you've got a client that's a fashion designer and you're desperate to get them into Drapers and you happen to notice that Roberta is the new features editor because you've seen it on Instagram, give it a few days and then send an email introducing yourself and your client and why they want to be in Drapers. So just being kind of smart and strategic can be really helpful. And then staying motivated. So it's fine. Hopefully, I've given you some useful information today and kind of ideas of how you can get things into place and maybe breathe some life back into your campaigns. That's fine. But by Friday, you might not be feeling quite so motivated, or in the middle of November when it's dark. So how do we stay motivated when we work in the world of PR? First of all, remember it's a hard job. It is hard. The landscape is changing. Budgets are being cut. Clients want more than ever. There's endless demands on you and your team. So give yourself a break and do look at what you have achieved. So celebrate your successes. If a journalist even comes back to you, I had a client yesterday and she had the BBC coming to an event and they couldn't go, but they let her know. And then we reorganized it for another time, but actually they were meeting Sir Keir Starmer, and I said, get him to answer this question from you, because that makes a great story if you can get this particular. So be clever about how you do these things. And if a journalist does come back to you, that's great, because quite often they don't. So don't see things as a failure, see them as successes and opportunities to go further. But set yourselves, as you have your goals with your clients, set achievable goals for yourself, then check in with your manager for feedback. If you're struggling, ask for support. And this comes from fostering a positive, collaborative work environment. Some of you might be working from home. It might be hybrid. You might be made redundant. There's all kinds of ways. So I think the more that you can have connections and you're not working in isolation, or if you like me, you work from home, quite often I'll go and work at the gym or I'll work in Starbucks or the library just to have that interaction with other people. invest in training and attend workshops like this, because there's all kinds of things that all of us can learn from somebody else that might just help you to view the situation differently. I would also say go to networking evenings, networking events and conferences. So again, CIPR, Women in PR, PRCA, your local business networking events, whatever it is, actually getting out and seeing people. You can do online events as well. They're always good. But getting out and meeting people can often be really beneficial. And actually, sometimes I do see the odd Twitter post or news update, and a journalist will say free for coffee. If you see that and you're where they are, usually London. I mean, I'm in Devon, so that doesn't really happen with me very often. But if I am in London and there's someone I particularly want to work with, I will try to do that. And let's remember that cake is always good. You can't go wrong with cake or a dog, I think. So that is a lot of information that I've given you today. The main thing I think it is know your media, build the relationships, be indispensable, eat cake. Any questions? Let's have a look.
Hi, Natalie. Thank you so much. Right,
That's
I've
okay.
lost myself. There I am.
I was
Didn't know if I
keeping
was
my
on
eye
camera.
on the time. I realized I had my phone charging, so I could talk for a very long time. But
No, I think you did
hopefully
really well.
it's given people an overview of how to set things up and then keep going.
No, I think you did perfectly for time. That was really interesting. If
Good.
anybody has any questions, please send them through now. Oh, we've got a question there. Any tips when it
Oh,
comes
okay.
to working with influencers?
Yes. So my feeling is that when we work with influencers, taking the same approach as journalists, but looking at are are they the right influencers? What are their following numbers like? But also just as important, what is their what's their engagement like? So have a look. Sometimes you're better off working with a newer or smaller or more niche influencer. I think I had I've had lots of experiences, but if they engage with their audience, so if it's Instagram, whatever it is, the more engaged they are, the more impact and benefit you're going to get. Look at how much it costs. I mean, sometimes I'll get agencies come to me and it's thousands, and is it a benefit? And also remembering quite often with influencers, they still have to have that ad. So are we looking for pure editorial, or are we looking for anything? So yes, use them, but look at your budgets and look at what you want to achieve and what your overall goals are. And have I would have, when it comes to influence, I would have a really strong contract in place. Look at your KPIs, look at the time that they're working with you, what you want from them, and keep ahead of that.
Thank you.
Um,
I've got another question here.
yeah.
From Amy. She said, "How best to seek out relevant industry publications rather than national press?"
Okay, so for that one, Amy, let me know what the industry is and I'll have a think. But one of the easiest things you can do is put the industry into Google, do a search and look at news. That's going to throw up who's writing about it or covering it at the moment. So take it from there. Um, and if you don't have something like Roxhill or a media database, just doing a Google. I mean, I think I did an Instagram live. Yes, I did. I did an Instagram live yesterday because randomly my husband, who's a surveyor, we had a copy of Heating, Ventilation and Plumbing arrive at the house. It's not my kind of magazine, but it just shows there's something for everyone. So if you make radiators and you sell it to installers, you want to be in this magazine. Plus they've got print and online. So sometimes it's just a little bit of research. And also, yes, if it's easier to find those 10 people if you've got a niche and it's industry specific and you become the go-to in that. Not only are you going to do a good job for your client or for your organization, but you take them to you with your next job. So I've got journalists that I was working with 30 years ago who are as old as me, and we still work together. Quite often, actually, I use them to talk to my clients about what press want. So it does work that way. Thinking outside of the box when it comes to pitching. God, It's kind of thinking, Jessica, what's the ideal? If you could get anything for your client, what's different? What's the trend? What is something that's going on at the moment that you could tap into? Could they see something that's slightly controversial? Have they got a different angle? That's the kind of thing of just who's the audience? What do they want? And I think one example I had was I worked for Epson and we had to do a campaign around printers at people's houses. And this was like 25 years ago. And in the end, we teamed up with Robbie Williams and went on tour with him with our printers. And that's how we got into things like L decoration and how to have a pretty office at home before that was even a thing. So there are ways that you can get outside of that box. Also think about what you like reading in terms of press, especially if you work on something that you're interested in personally. What's going to be interesting to you or those people? Oh, you're welcome, Lucy. And I will send the slides to the college so you get those. Okay, how do you, right, there's a number of websites. I think there might be something called subjectline.com, and you can actually put your ideas into it. It'll rank it out of 100 of what will make it. But just thinking, what's going to make a good headline? I don't know, chocolate soled shoes, chocolate shoes with chocolate soles for sale in Harvey Nicks. Well, that'll make someone open it because either it's an April Fool's joke or it's really disposable shoes. So something that's just going to get them to click. It doesn't look necessarily like clickbait, but just something that's going to stand out in their inbox. If it just says new website launches, they're going to delete it. So that's what I would say for that one. Slides.
I think that might be everything.
That's everything.
Any more? For any more? I will, in the meantime, post in the chat our email address and a link to our CIPR courses in case anybody is interested. But if you have any questions, please feel free to email us. And like I mentioned, the slides and this recording will be sent out to you in the next couple of days. But if there's no more questions, then I think we'll round it up. So thank you so much for coming along, everyone. And thank you so much, Natalie, for presenting. That was really interesting and really informative. And I'm sure everyone also felt the same.
I hope so.
And thank you for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you for asking me. And yeah, it was a pleasure. Enjoy your afternoons, everybody.